Hello and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to make some Pokemon card art using only energy cards. I got this idea because there were a lot of Instagram reels of people making amazing art with energy cards, since they're so abundant and they just, would make for some great base, since they're basically just like very simple colors that you actually can work with for your artwork. So I saw some people use like the cards as like a way of making stained glass art on a large scale and replicating Pokemon as like a really beautiful stained glass piece. In a way, just, with the cards and not with glass. And then I also saw people just painting their favorite Pokemon onto the cards, and I thought it looked really cool. So I wanted to, make something similar like this and just combine the two ideas. Now, some comments in the last videos when I did card art actually suggested that I peel off the backing of the cards, so I tried that and it went horrible. I could either only remove the front face, which was then really thin and curly and didn't have any volume to it and any strength, or the back face just a tiny bit and it would always rip, and I really tried to go in with the blade, separate it where the black inner card thing is and things like that, and I just couldn't get it to work. So if you have any ideas how you actually separate the cards, let me know, because I really struggled with that. But yeah, in the end I just went with using the full cards. And you can see I actually designed two Pokemon, two of my favorites, Vulpix and Zorua, and the poses I used were from card art that already exists. I chose some of my favorite poses from these two Pokemon, and I traced the outlines and made it kind of a little bit more stained glass art. And then I just went and placed it onto the cards, trying to keep the dark parts on the dark part of the card and the lighter parts, from the shades on the lighter part of the card. And I just traced them with a ballpoint stylus and then cut them out. And then I wanted to glue them and I thought, hey, this will work, and yeah, no. I had huge gaps, and at first I was like, okay, let's erase them. But the pieces were so uneven, you can see the gap shapes are so vastly different to the shapes the other pieces I drew. So I decided, let's try a different approach. I'm still going to use my ballpoint stylus as a tracing pen and then just cutting the pieces out, but I'm first of all not going to try and cut out all the tiny pieces in between, because I have the fear that the edges will fray a bit more and it will be a bit more uneven, or that the glue will seep through. So I thought, you can just indent the lines that you want with a ballpoint stylus, so why not you do that, and then instead cut pieces that are adjacent to each other and with the same color, just basically in one go. And that worked pretty well. And then what I did to make them match with the pieces that are adjacent to them is I actually traced the pieces first with the ballpoint stylus, and then I used my knife blade, and as you can see when I trace it slightly, it leaves white marks, and I used the piece I already cut out, placed it where it should be over the traced bit, and then just scored it with the tip of my blade. And that left a line that pretty much matched up the edge that I already cut. And yeah, that's basically how I managed to join all the pieces together. There's still some tiny gaps sometimes, but in most cases it worked out pretty much perfectly. And then all I did was use a black marker and just painted the edges. In this case I'm using just black and red for the respective parts. And a lighter gray for the lighter gray parts, but I wanted a darker outline to highlight the creases in between the cuts, just to give it more of the stained glass look. And yes, you can see the pieces fit together really well. But of course, it would be troubling to trace all the pieces that were sitting together next to the pieces I already have, and have to trace them separately. So I basically just used some clear tape that is not too sticky and stuck the pieces together one at a time every time I added a piece, and that actually helped seeing how everything comes together, seeing where all the separate parts go that I already cut out, so I don't have to struggle puzzling things together too much. And in the end, this was actually quite a good method. I know that another method obviously would be to glue the piece I printed out onto a piece of tape and then just cut out every section separately, tape it onto the places on the card where I want them to, and just cut them out then. But I'm going to try that for the Vulpix one. For now I want to stick with this method. Also because like I didn't quite know how it would turn out with like having the tape edges and then also having to like cut the tape perfectly without it like sticking or like the shapes being off. So, you know, this method worked for this card, so I just used it that way. Also, one thing you will notice is that I'm actually using the gradients on the energy cards, like purposefully for the body. For example, I like laid it onto more of a gradient part to give it the shading just a little bit more. Does the shading always make sense? Not quite, but like my idea is that the parts get lighter towards the top. And that is also because like some of the parts are technically too large for the section of color I need. But with the shading, like I have to do some shading anyways. So using it in this way actually worked out pretty well, and I think it looks super cute. Now, of course, I had to reuse the card that I already glued some pieces on, so I decided to like cut the face and things out of that, because I don't really want to waste these cards, and I'm gonna like keep the usable parts still, just in case I'm going to make another 3D card art in like a while and I need like spacers or something, because using like leftover cards as like backing for like other cards to get the height differences to make them look 3D. Actually, I found this the best method because they have a very even height, of course, since the cards are all roughly the same thickness. So, you know, they just go into a little Ziploc bag so I can find them for my next project. Now, my cuts still aren't that clean, but like slowly over the process, the last few cards I noticed they're getting a little bit cleaner. And I watched a decent bit of Instagram videos, and the people that make these cards, they like go over the line so many times and like clean up the edges and things like that. I'm just always very surprised that their blades can slice through this thick cardboard like really well, and I'm using a very good blade, but it still like works when I like trim some things off, like the overhang I have here to make the piece fit. It actually worked well enough. Like, I didn't think it would work that well. There's still a little bit of like the edges curling upwards when I'm cutting, but I found that using a ballpoint stylus and just going all around the edges works out super well to like round them down again, just like I basically did with the other pieces from my last cards, kind of. Also, I found certain straight pieces, definitely cutting them just like with multiple passes works best and easy, but for the round pieces or like for tiny details, like carefully stabbing just the tip of the knife all the way through to the other side to make sure that everything is cut perfectly, so when you like try to remove the pieces, they're not getting stuck and like either peeling off the front or the back, or like fraying the edges really badly, or like creasing. Works really well, so I did a lot of this like stabby motion. And I can tell you now, I actually, you know, already while I'm editing this, finished the Vulpix card. I did it right after. I'm saying right after, basically the days after, because this already took like over 5 hours of just sitting and cutting the parts and then placing them. So it took quite a while, which is why I'm making this a two-parter with the other card. But yeah, basically the stabbing like was my favorite method that worked, and I found a rhythm and like a angle that works best for me with like slowly just nipping away tiny bits. And I got clean cuts for most of the parts without like having too much fraying. Again, still some curving around the edges, still some slight unevenness, but considering like I'm not doing this that often and considering how difficult it actually is to cut the cards, I'm pretty proud of these cuts, and I think they turned out really cute. I did forget to cut out the ears for the Zorua, like the inner parts, but that was totally fine. I just went back, marked them out, and then, you know, later I'm gonna trace them and fill them in. For the eyes, I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to like cut out the eye rings separately or paint them on. So I decided I'm going to make the white backing, and then since I already had one of the peeled off water energy cards, I actually used the top part of that as like the little colored rings, and it is not the cleanest. I would have hoped that it looks a little cleaner, but I think it looks fine and still cute, and at least I got the shape decently right. But yeah, I think actually painting them on or something would have been easier, because all of this honestly was such a struggle. And you know, I think in the end, again, it turned out fine, but it could have looked better. I also really love how the colors actually like match up together with the red from the fire energy cards, and then the darker tones from the like darkness energy. Of course, there's always like a limit to the colors we have in energy cards, and with, for example, fairy energies not being a thing anymore, and you having to use old energy cards for that, for example, like certain shades of pinks and things like that are missing, which is also, you know, why I started with this one, because like the Vulpix has a couple more shades of like reds and browns that we kind of have, but it's gonna be a bit more puzzling to get like all the shades right. So actually starting out with some simple red and grey shades in this case, and some like dark blacks, worked out super well. But yeah, then in the end all I had to do was just peeling the pieces off the tape carefully, trying to like not rip them. Again, the tape isn't that strong, but there's some pieces that just have gotten a bit weak because they're so tiny. But yeah, in the end, I just basically played puzzling, and it was super satisfying to like put the final piece together onto the card. I totally could have just trimmed off all the excess tape and just glued it straight on, but I feared that would leave like a gap, or like the shimmering of the tape, you know, since it's kind of a bit reflective and more smooth would be like a thing that would be very noticeable. So, you know, I just decided against that and just went this puzzling route, and I'm glad I did, because this was so much fun. This was, I think, my favorite part of this entire process, playing the glue and just putting the pieces where they belong. And in the end, like, I think it actually turned out so adorable. Again, the eyes are a bit off, but I'm really happy now with the method I tried to like get all the gaps closer. I really think the gaps actually worked out really well, and yes, there are some tiny ones, but they really aren't noticeable. I did go over some of the edges, because when I glued them down and held them with the tweezers, like some of the white kept showing through again because it was like bent up, but it wasn't too bad. I just had to be really careful with the tip of my like marker to not like color any of the foil parts that I don't want to have like lines on. But I was like super careful, went super slowly, and in the end it like really highlighted the gaps in between the parts. And then again, just all I needed to do was go over things with my ballpoint stylus and carefully trace like the little markings to make the stained glass effect. And here you can see the final result. I think it looks super adorable, and you can definitely recognize the Pokémon. Of course, it is a bit more simple in like the colors and the shadings and details than like a drawn piece would be, but I think that's the charm, and I really love how like the blocking of the little shapes came together with like the shading around the legs and the belly and things like that. And yeah, I'm super happy with this. But anyways, let me know in the comments down below what you think of this kind of gear, and do you have any other ideas on repurposing energy cards, since again they're the ones we have quite a lot of. I saw some people actually gluing them to the boards and make like fun little wall art with all these cards, and I think that's also a very fun idea. But as I said, let me know in the comments down below, and also let me know which Pokemon is your favorite and which one would you actually make in this style as a card art. And as always, I hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye bye!